Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Tuesday, October 28th, 2025. Colonel Douglas Macgregor will be here in just a moment. Can there be peace in Ukraine while the illegitimate President Zelensky is in charge? But first, this. History tells us every market eventually falls. Currencies collapse. And look at where we are now. 37 trillion in national debt. Stocks at record highs defying gravity. So what happens next? Groceries, gas, housing, everything's going up. And this dollar, it buys less every day. When the system breaks, your stocks won't save you and your dollars won't either. But one thing will: gold. I've said it on my show for years. Gold survives collapse. Central bankers know this and billionaires know it. That's why they're buying more. Is it too late to buy or is it just the right time? Call my friends at Lear Capital to find out. Ask questions. Get the free information. There's no pressure. And that's why I buy my gold and silver from Lear. And right now you can get up to $20,000 in bonus metals with a qualified purchase. Call 800-511-4620 or go to LearJudgeNap.com today. Colonel Macgregor, welcome here, my dear friend. Thank you for accommodating my schedule. Before we get to Ukraine and Zelensky and some of the crazy stuff he's been saying, what is your understanding of the state of preparedness of the United States military today?
Well, as you know, I just finished this piece that was published in Responsible Statecraft. And I simply was pointing to things that you can find in the congressional record, the congressional research offices about the state of our equipment, much of which is quite old and in need, frankly, in large measure of replacement by new equipment. We also have a huge problem with the Navy and the ships that we're building right now. They're not keeping up. The repairs are not being made. I think there's a combination of things. First of all, on the one hand, it's the age of the equipment. We're still utilizing things that we've been utilizing over the last 30, 35 years. At the same time, the op tempo, that is the operational tempo, how much we're asking of the force, has never, ever decreased. This is one of the reasons why one of the former Army chiefs of staff, Ray Odierno, he was actually a classmate of mine at West Point, and he made the point, you keep telling us to do more with less. He said, how about doing less with less? I think that's a problem across the boards in the armed forces. They're overstretched and they're worn out. And I think the personnel problem is quite serious too.
How long will it take the United States military to be up to par, say, with the Russians or the Chinese?
Well, remember that neither Russia nor China are necessarily maritime powers. We are, of necessity, a maritime power. We live on a giant island called North America. Now, the Chinese have invested very heavily in shipbuilding and built lots of ships. They're running into different kinds of problems. The Chinese are not a seafaring nation. People in the Chinese Navy are not very happy in most cases to be there. They don't want to be far from home. They don't want to leave China. They have a desertion problem. There's also a lot of corruption. A lot of the ships they build leave much to be desired. You find cracks in the hulls, and they continually arrest people and charge them with corruption and jail them. I'm talking about people in and out of uniform in the military industry. Russia doesn't need a large navy. It's got a very, very capable submarine fleet. They're basically in the business of denying access to Russia if we try to attack them, and essentially isolating us as much as possible from any troops we may have on the Eastern Hemisphere. Again, they have a different set of priorities. So when you say, what do we have to do to catch up? When you talk about the Russians, they're great powerhouses in land power, the Army. And we are decades behind the Russians in that area, and we're not likely to catch up anytime soon. But here's the good news, Judge. Unless we want to keep invading people all over the world, we don't need a very large army. What we need is a very good army.
Right.
Doesn't need to be that large, but you need a much better force than the one we currently have.
Just briefly back to the Navy. Why are our ships off the coast of Taiwan? As far as I know, the Chinese ships are not off the coast of Los Angeles or even Honolulu.
Judge, this is a huge problem. We do
Well,
not have a new national security policy. We don't have a new national military strategy. I don't think we've had a viable national military strategy for decades. What we do is almost entirely on impulse. Nobody sits down and asks the fundamental questions. What are our vital strategic interests? If you ask that question, everyone would lose interest immediately in doing anything about Taiwan. The same thing is true about our presence in Ukraine. And again, I think this would be true for most of what goes on in the Middle East and Africa. Our interests are actually very limited, but we have a community in Washington of which the president is now a card-carrying member that sees the world as their enchilada. In other words, go everywhere, do everything, and it's all done on impulse. It's not we're going there because we're looking at some long-term strategic outcome. Nobody's asking the critical questions. What's the purpose to begin with? And how do we do it? And ultimately, what do we want it all to look like down the line? I mean, we have nobody sitting in our Department of Defense, I guess I have to say War Department now, who is like the people that sit in the Japanese Defense Ministry who say, where do we want to be in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years? Right. There's no thing like that. And that doesn't mean that people would not do that if we allowed them to do it. But they're too busy chasing, go here, do this, assemble a task force in the Caribbean. We're going to invade Venezuela. Oh, send it all instantly to the Eastern Mediterranean. We're going to attack Iran. I mean, where does this all fit in? How does this help us?
It almost seems like much of it is on the whim of the president and a Secretary of Defense /war who doesn't say no or why or think about the consequences, just says yes, sir. But let's move on, segueing eventually over to Ukraine, where I want to spend some time with you. How can Washington?
Just real quick before you leave, you just said something that's very important. Everybody is saying yes. Well, that's what everybody was hired to do.
Right. They're sycophants, as you called them in your piece.
And over the last 30 years, everybody's learned that if you stand up and say, it's probably a bad idea to dismantle the Iraqi state, its administration, and to put all of its soldiers out of work. Anybody who said that, and it was only one person who publicly, stood up and said to Paul Bremer, this is a bad idea. We'll have an insurgency on our hands. And that was a colonel, an Army colonel in the Chemical Corps. All the generals, Army and Marine, who sat in the office and listened to Bremer, and when he told them this is what we're going to do, I think it was Petraeus who was famous for saying, well, I guess downsizing is hard to do. And everybody chuckled and walked out. It was a catastrophe. It should never have happened. So what's the lesson? If you want 4 stars, if you want to advance, if you want to be a hero, you want to be rewarded in retirement, well, then the answer is always yes, sir.
How can Washington, in the grip of neocons and Zionists, deal with its EU partners who do not want peace in Ukraine? They want the war to go on and on and on because they somehow think it can be used as a battering ram against Vladimir Putin's Russian presidency.
I'm not sure that I have a good answer to that one, but I think we have to also keep in mind that there's a willingness to let the so-called pot boil. In other words, it's obvious that President Trump has no path to a Nobel Peace Prize that leads through Ukraine. So I don't think he's terribly interested anymore. I think he would like to get it off his agenda, but he can't do that because everybody around him wants to sustain the war. I mean, I'm not sure that's going to last too much longer. In other words, our ability to sustain it. But nevertheless, I think that's where we are. Okay, we'll let them go, do whatever they want. It doesn't matter. And the danger of this, of course, as you know, is that he's abdicating his responsibility as the leader of NATO. And even though the British and the French and the Germans are in terrible economic shape and have very, very limited military capability, there's always the outside possibility they do something stupid and provoke a war with Russia. I would hope that he intervenes and stops that. But right now, I think he's just decided to focus elsewhere and let Europe be the pot on the stove that just continues to gurgle away, but the water never completely boils off.
Aside from listening to you, and by the way, we know that somebody in the West Wing watches Judging Freedom. I don't know who it is, but someone's assigned to that. How? That was flattering. Well, what will it take, aside from listening to you, what will it take for Washington to recognize that the Kremlin, that Russia, has legitimate, bona fide, sovereignty-based national security interests?
I think the answer, and I sat this morning with some people who are very familiar with the trip to Japan that President Trump just made. And I said, can you explain to me why suddenly the Prime Minister of Japan says that President Trump ought to receive the Nobel Prize for peace? And they all laughed. And they said, well, you have to understand the Japanese. The Japanese are very utilitarian. They wanted the tariffs lowered, which they got. They want to continue to do business with the Russians in terms of oil and gas, and they got that. They're going to sign a treaty with the Russians. They're doing business with the Chinese on an enormous scale. The Chinese market's much more important to them than we are at this point. So they decided that what they would do is they say, yes, you should be the recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize. And here, by the way, let us give you one of the most expensive set of golf clubs made in history. And you'll enjoy these. And we certainly love you and appreciate all that you've done. And they got everything they wanted from Donald Trump. In other words, I think they figured out you got to flatter the man, tell him how wonderful he is, give him nice gifts, and you'll get pretty much whatever you want. Well, that's not an answer for, unfortunately, Ukraine. I wish that it were, because then if President Putin were smart, he'd give him a set of expensive golf clubs or some other gift and say, I'll sign on for the Nobel Peace Prize and let's all live happily ever after. Then I'm sure that President Trump would be delighted. He'd get the optics that he wanted, the giant media event that he wants, and he could declare himself another superhero for ending another war. Whether or not anything really ends is not terribly important. All you have to do is look at the Middle East. So I guess that's kind of where we are right now.
Right. So you're telling us that the Japanese and I'm not being critical of a nationality, the Japanese government under the current new prime minister is not unwilling to behave like a sycophant.
No.
I'm using your word. How dangerous are the sycophants, Hegseth, Rubio, Kellogg, Gorka, and others that whisper into Donald Trump's ears every day?
Well, first of all, the Japanese are not directly dangerous. You just have to keep in mind that they are ultimately going to pursue their aims regardless of whatever we say. And that's what they're going to do. The problem for the president is that when he surrounds himself with people that say, oh, Mr. President, you've saved the country. Thank God for you. If it weren't for you, this country wouldn't even exist today. You're right. The country was dead just 6 months ago, and you brought it back to life. That's the kind of thing that President Trump likes to hear. He likes to hear it in public. And if you watch some of these cabinet meetings, they're pretty sickening because this kind of nonsense goes on. It's all theater for the American public. Nothing of any real value in terms of policy happens. And he makes more announcements. There's no real strategy guiding anything. It's what he decides to do at any given point in time. Now, why does this happen? Because certainly for the last 50 to 80 years, whatever we did really didn't matter very much. In other words, presidents, with the exception of LBJ, could get away with almost anything in terms of foreign and defense policy as long as it looked good. LBJ failed because of the Vietnam War. That was a catastrophe. It's not impossible that we couldn't see something like that again in the future, but at least for the moment, people say, well, what difference does it make? I don't know how many times I've heard that from people. We're going into country X, and I would say, what? Why? Well, what difference does it make, Doug? Let's just go and get this over with. It doesn't matter. And I think that's where we are with most of the people that surround him that advise him. Their chief items on their agenda, for instance, Israel, As long as that's taken care of and Israel comes first, I don't think a lot of them care what else happens.
Is the war in Ukraine now Donald Trump's war?
Well, of course it is. And the interesting part is that it's falling apart very, very rapidly right now. The Russians are closing in on Dnipro. They're running up to the river. They're getting out of the tough terrain where they've been operating for a long time. The terrain is open. It's ideal for rapid advances. The whole line is collapsing. I read a report this morning that came from Ukrainian sources that simply said we've got maybe 3 or 4 people per kilometer along this extensive front. This is impossible. We can't maintain it. Everything's crumbling. The losses have reached the point where you can't replace anybody that you lose. So the Russians are winning. What I think we're seeing now is a more rapid advance than we've seen in the past, because I think President Putin has discovered he's not going to get any assistance or any help under any circumstances from anyone in the United States or Europe to end this conflict, which means he's got to advance, and that's what he's doing.
What kind of an impediment to the realistic recognition of the inevitable Russian triumph is Vladimir Zelensky himself?
Vladimir, let's put this. Volodya is what is the name that Volodymyr in Ukraine.
Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to throw you off by using Putin's first name.
He uses the Ukrainian, even though he was born as a Russian speaker and so forth. I think the issue is very simply this: as long as he can speak publicly and maintain the fiction that he has a government that works and armed forces that are responsible to him, this is going to continue. And I think the Russians have figured that out. And so I suspect that he should be very careful, because I'm not sure he's going to last much longer, because I think they see him as a permanent impediment. Now, what they don't want and haven't wanted in Western Ukraine, in other words, beyond the river, is chaos. They're not interested in controlling it. This is back, as I think you've heard from Jeffrey Sachs and John Mearsheimer and others. They have no interest in governing Western Ukraine. Now, they do have an interest in Odessa, and I still expect the Russians to seize it. They're already on the other side of the river in Kherson. They have a beachhead, and I'm sure they'll bring over more forces. I'd be very surprised if they didn't take Odessa. It's historically Russian, a Russian-speaking city. It was never part of Ukraine historically. But other than that, I don't think they really want to cross into Western Ukraine. So the question is, how much longer do they tolerate the existence of this man? Because they know where he is. Killing him is not that big a deal from the standpoint of can we do it or not. But I'm afraid that as long as he's there, he will continue to say what his sponsors who put him there, who've paid for everything, have told him to say.
Does the Kremlin take seriously his threats on President Putin?
Oh, absolutely. They have a huge problem with Ukrainian infiltration into Russia. That's an enormous border, and all sorts of people can infiltrate. And you've got plenty of Ukrainians who can speak Russian as well as any Russian. And there's usually no real ethnic way to distinguish a Ukrainian from a Russian. In other words, they're very close to each other genetically. The ability to speak the language is there. So they've got lots of agents on the ground in Moscow, St. Petersburg, other major cities. And so, yes, they could very definitely make a good go at President Putin. And I'm sure the FSB knows that and is doing everything in their power to protect him.
Switching gears, what national security threat does Venezuela pose to the United States, Colonel Macgregor?
Well, we know that the whole drug business is overblown in terms of Venezuela's role in the drug trade. They keep saying this because they know that anything they do that is aimed at the drug business or infiltration into the United States is going to be cheered by most Americans. I mean, I certainly support it. I would like to stop it as well. My way of stopping it, though, is not to invade somebody else's country, but to deal with it inside our own borders and to defend our borders and coastal waters, airports, harbors, and so forth. But he sold this idea that if we go down and blow up parts of Venezuela and potentially even Colombia. He's now talking in very bellicose terms about Colombia, that somehow or another this will help. I don't think it will. I don't think it's a question of can we do it? Of course, we can overpower these countries in the Western Hemisphere. That's not news, but does this really benefit us very much? And the answer is, I don't think so. Now, is the interest oil? Certainly oil is part of it. Gas is part of it. They do have gold mines, emeralds, rare earths in some quantities, especially, I think, lithium. But, what are we living in? The Viking age, where we all climb into the boats up there in Miami and we start rowing for Venezuela and decide that we're going to invade the place, steal everything, and come home again? It's kind of crazy. And there's no thought being given right now to how do we deal with the place if it comes apart, which is usually what happens when you try to execute a quote unquote regime change operation, even though we're now saying, oh, no, we have no intention to do that. Well, then we don't need Mrs. Machado, do we? Who is out there advertising that the first thing she will do if she becomes president of Venezuela is move the Venezuelan embassy to Jerusalem. Really? That's her top priority for Venezuela?
Well, she is a renowned Zionist. I mean, a colonel getting just threw me off with that. I thought you were being sarcastic, but I guess she is serious. This morning, a large Russian cargo plane landed in Caracas. What was likely on the plane, Colonel? Anti-aircraft?
I would think any number of missiles that could be fired that would provide some measure of defense. I don't think they can do a great deal in the realm of air defense. I could be wrong, but that takes a lot of training and a lot of time to build an effective integrated air defense system. Now, they could provide some point defense, particularly if they expect that we will try to strike and decapitate, kill Maduro early on. That is certainly possible. There are any number of different things that could be on there. I'd be more interested in what goes back. And the reason I say that is historically, when the Russians have done business with the Venezuelans, it's been on a cash and carry basis. And I'm not talking about cash, I'm talking about hard gold. They literally load up the planes with gold and fly that back to Russia. So I imagine some deal on that scale may well be in the offing. The bad news is that if we're dumb enough to go in there, and it looks like we are, it's going to become an open wound for us in the Western Hemisphere. It's going to do enormous.
Can you say that again, please, Colonel?
Yeah, if we go into Venezuela, it will become an open wound for us. And I say that because we have a terrible track record, whether you go to Guatemala, Nicaragua, El Salvador. We've meddled in all these places. Hundreds of thousands of people are being killed. We could cause a civil war to break out inside Venezuela. We have no idea. Are they embittered hard fighters? Some yes, most no. Will they fall back into the interior of the country and then be helped by the Brazilians and Colombians and others who will come in there and raise permanent hell with us while we're in the country? Can we cleanly install Mrs. Machado with enough CIA support as well as military backing to avoid all of that? I don't know. This whole thing doesn't strike me as having been very carefully thought out. And I guess you're aware that just this morning, some number of mercenaries from Colombia raised by the CIA to go into Colombia and effectively execute what some people are calling a false flag were captured. That doesn't seem to have worked. That's not a good thing. I have no confidence that we can go in there and make anything right. I have every fear that we could go in there and end up making everything wrong.
As we speak, the Pentagon announced that it has destroyed 4 more speedboats and has killed 14 more people. These in the Eastern Pacific. I don't know how much longer this killing can be going on without some sort of a repercussion to it. You can't just keep killing people without due process.
Well, remember these so-called submarines that the president mentions, they're actually semi-submersibles. They ride very, very low in the water so that they're very difficult to detect at sea. They have a small conning tower on it, usually one or two people aboard, and they do carry vast quantities of drugs, although they have delivered people as well. I worked 12, 13 years ago on a contract to support Joint Integrated Task Force South, and they're very good. GIATA South is really a very good headquarters. It's almost ideal in many respects as a model for interagency cooperation. They have been very successful, contrary to what the Secretary of State Rubio and the President and others have said. They've done a great job in the Caribbean and also in the Pacific. The Pacific is very different. The Pacific side of Mexico is very, very deep, whereas the Atlantic side or the Caribbean side is very shallow. So it's very difficult when you're trying to go up along the shelf that's only 60 feet deep and hide, but it's much easier out in the Pacific. And normally what they do is that they go out into the Pacific, some 30, 40 miles, whatever it is, and then they come back into the United States. Now, you can blow these things up till kingdom come. I don't think it's going to make that much difference. And again, you get into this problem of are you absolutely positively sure that every boat you destroy is an act in the defense of the United States? Are any of these boats not necessarily what we're saying they are? It doesn't matter, Judge, because most people listen to that. You say, well, we blew up another drug boat. Hey!
You're exactly right. Tell me about it. I hear that all the time when I preach the necessity of due process. But I'm sorry I interrupted you. Go ahead.
No, listen, yeah, that's exactly right. And the worst part is that the drug problem that we confront is here at home. And I'm not talking so much about the depressed human beings or some who are just curious that live across the country that purchase and take fentanyl, most of which comes out of Mexico, obviously, doesn't come out of Venezuela, or the cocaine and heroin that comes through various sources. We have to deal with that here in the United States. We have to enforce federal law. If we can't enforce federal law inside the country, what makes us think that we're going to solve anything by invading somebody else's territory?
Right.
It just doesn't pass the smell test. Now, let's pause for a minute and consider what we can get out of Venezuela. Everybody points to oil and gas. Well, looking at the costs of extracting the heavy oil, which is a high sulfur content in the Orinoco Basin, which is where most of it is, not exclusively, but most of it, you could probably, for the price of getting 1 barrel of oil in the United States out of West Texas, you can probably get 2 barrels out of Venezuela. Now, what you'll do if you do that, you still have to refine it. And that's another cost that's added onto it. But you're still going to be less than what it costs us to do it here at home. Well, if your goal is to destroy the oil industry here in the United States, I guess that's a good way to do it. Go down, seize the oil fields, pump the oil there. It's cheaper, faster, better. Incidentally, it's cheaper, faster, better in Iran than it is almost anywhere else. Libya is another place because they have very fine crude that is light and easy to refine. So the stuff in Venezuela is plentiful. There's no question about it. It's going to take time to extract it, but it will ultimately be cheaper than what we extract, but it's going to take a lot of refining. What's the point of the whole thing? My point is that, yes, oil and gas plays a role in this. There's no doubt about it. But could we not have done that through negotiation with Mr. Maduro? Why are we obsessing over Maduro? And I think that's the other piece we have to answer.
Well, and that piece is spelled Rubio because this has been his baby since he was a member of the House of Representatives before he was a senator.
Well, listen, I don't doubt that at all. And I'm surprised that the next step is not invade Cuba or something. But having said that, there are people in Washington that think this is some sort of strategic coup against China and Russia. People are saying to me, oh, we flipped the board. We'll flip the board if we go into Venezuela. Russia and China won't get at any of those things. We'll have total control. We'll flip the strategic chessboard. Okay, I don't think it's going to make that much difference to the Chinese and the Russians. The Russians have already said, look, we'll give you whatever you can use, but we're not going to fight for you. It's too far from the Eastern Hemisphere, and we don't have a stake in that. The Chinese, very similar. They'll go in someplace, they'll strike a deal for infrastructure construction in return for access to minerals and so forth, but they'll still want to be paid. Neither the Chinese nor the Russians are going to lose a lot of sleep over whether or not we're in Venezuela.
I have to I have to play for you a clip on all of this from your favorite senator from South Carolina.
We have to do this.
Chris?
We looked at the JAG manual. Preventative self-defense employed to counter non-imminent threats is illegal under international law. So if we are not at war and these suspected criminals pose no threat of imminent violence, isn't this potentially a war crime to be killing the people on these boats and then to be taking out a leader?
No, not at all. I don't know what manual you're referring to, but I know what President Bush 41 did. He took down Ortega, the leader of Panama, because he was involved in drug trafficking, threatening our country. Venezuela is now partnering with Hezbollah. Hezbollah is running out of money because Iran is weak.
That's not new.
Partnering with drug cartels in Venezuela. No, it should have stopped. Here's what's new. You got a commander-in-chief that's not going to put up with this crap. We're not going to sit on the sidelines and watch boats full of drugs come to our country. We're going to blow them up and kill the people that want to poison America. And we're now going to expand operations, I think, to the land. So please be clear about what I'm saying today. President Donald Trump sees Venezuela and Colombia as direct threats to our country because they house narco-terrorist organizations. The leader of Venezuela is an indicted drug dealer in American courts. So, yeah, the game is changing when it comes to drug traffickers and drug cartels. We're going to use military force like we have in the past to protect our country. That's the new game we're playing, and I'm glad we're playing that game. And if I were Maduro, I'd find a way to leave before he goes down.
This is a lawyer and either a colonel or a general in the reserve who's taken a similar oath to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution that you and I have taken. And he said, well, it's a new game. We can kill people because we think they're engaged in crime. Can you do it in Charleston, South Carolina, Senator Graham?
I don't know, but I'm ready to try.
Great. There you go.
You know, Judge, it's interesting because we have all of this mindless rhetoric about the post-war rules-based order. We keep touting that. We beat people over the head with it. Oh, Mr. Putin, you violated the post-war liberal, rules-based order. What is the rules-based order? It's whatever we want to do when we want to do it, whatever we care to enforce when it's in our interest to do so. We have always been a violator of all this sort of business. You go all the way back to Vietnam in 1965 and then go forward. We violated these things left and right. We don't care. And most Americans don't pay a great deal of attention until it hits them here at home. And things are about to hit here at home, but I think it's more on the financial side, but it'll have an impact. But the bottom line is that he's not saying anything we haven't heard before. It's not really the case. It's a series of misleading statements designed to obfuscate what's really going on. And that goes back to the resources, not so much the drugs. I mean, you've got an agency in the intelligence community that's been dealing in drugs for years. We know that. That's an open secret. So who are we kidding? The problem is that this stands an excellent chance of blowing back on us in a big way. And that's because Venezuela, if we attack it, is not going to be alone. You're going to see most of Latin America align itself with Venezuela. You'll see hundreds of thousands of paramilitaries pour in from Colombia, Brazil, Ecuador. This is a huge country, as we've discussed before, 30 million people, most of whom are concentrated not in the interior, but along the coast. And then a coastal region, the rest of the region is just enormous. It's the size of Germany, France, Austria, Switzerland combined. How can we control it? What if they decide to fall back into the interior and launch a series of insurgent operations against us once we're in the country. An awful lot depends on how much damage we do on the way in, how much difficulty we have in preserving some semblance of order, how vindictive we want to be by attacking not just Maduro, but his supporters. And Maduro's strongest supporters at this point, Judge, are in the military.
Here's something that will make you laugh.
Good.
Shades of Colin Powell holding a vial of what he said was some sort of poison. This is 100% Venezuela drug cartel fentanyl. Now, obviously, we've superimposed this, but this is what we're going to see.
Yeah, and ultimately, this is all meaningless. It's a facade designed to justify a short-term operation and interest. You know, President Trump said a lot of things when he was running for election. One of those that I totally agree with is that we should be more focused on the Western Hemisphere. There are a lot of things that we need to do in the Western Hemisphere, but invade Latin America is probably not a good idea. And you're not going to fix most of what's wrong down in Latin America any more than we could fix what was wrong in Iraq. We shouldn't try to do it. We should stay out. We should have a decent level of respect for other people's culture and way of life, whether we particularly care for it or not. But I strongly support enforcing federal law against drug trafficking and human trafficking. I think we should be very hard on that. If we're hard on that inside the United States and on our borders, then this is going to dry up. There won't be any interest in shipping this stuff north because they can't get the money for it, because they won't have the access they did. But nobody seems to think in those terms. They think if we go down there and blow the place up, that it will improve the situation further north. I think it'll make matters worse.
Our friend Ambassador Freeman has a famous one-liner: searching for monsters abroad has an inevitable way of bringing them home. Colonel, thank you very much. Thank you for letting me go all across the board on all these issues. We didn't touch Israel and Gaza, but we'll do it next time. Thank you for your time. Look forward to seeing you again soon, my dear friend.
Sure. Thank you, Judge.
All the best. Coming up, a busy day still. At 1 o'clock, Colonel Bill Astori. At 2 o'clock, Matthew Ho. At 3 o'clock, Colonel Karen Kwiatkowski. Judge Napolitano for Judging Freedom.